Welcome everyone to Sustainable in the City. We'll take just a few moments to let everyone come into the Zoom room and we'll get started here shortly.
Hi, good morning. Or afternoon, I guess.
It's officially noon on the dot. No. We are very excited to be having this extremely important conversation with some great folks from the mayor's office. We're glad so many of you are taking your lunch hour to join us and talk climate resilience. It's another beautiful fall day. We've had several of them in a row. Maybe we'll still get another summer feeling in the next few days. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does it seem like we're going to have another heat wave?
I don't know. We might have a fake fall here. I definitely know that it's been a lot colder than I'm ready for. But it's one of those days though where you don't know how to dress. Like, should you start out with, something warmer and then you have to take it off all day and put some on? And I definitely have been struggling with that lately.
Yeah, that time of year, right?
But it's definitely getting low there.
Layers are key.
For sure. Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's fun seeing leaves start to fall around. It's a nice time of year for sure. But we are going to be talking about in climate resilience, how some of these things may be shifting over time when we start to experience fall. And I'll let the experts speak more to that, but just to give a little teaser. Well, it seems like we have a good amount of people in the Zoom room, so we'll go ahead and get us started. So welcome again to Sustainable in the City. Today's episode, we are very excited to be talking about Nashville's climate resilience with Kendra Abkowitz and Kristin Stroup from the Office of Mayor Freddie O'Connell. Kendra serves as the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer, and Kristin as the Executive Fellow for Building Resilience in City Operations. So two prime experts to have joining us for this conversation. And we'll be talking about Nashville's draft Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan and how it helps to ensure that Nashville's infrastructure, systems, economy, and community can anticipate, cope with, and bounce back from expected and unexpected events. So that all sounds like a lot of complicated stuff, but Chris and Kendra are going to help us understand, what we can do as Nashville residents, what the mayor's office is doing to help with this. So Sustainable in the City, as a reminder, is a partnership program with Zero Waste Nashville, my organization, and Urban Green Lab, Carissa's organization. So my name is Allie Omens, and I'm the Zero Waste Program Coordinator for Zero Waste Nashville. We are a team of Metro Nashville Waste Services. So we are a Metro Nashville government division. Very glad to be working with Chris and Kendra on a whole lot of things related to waste and also climate resilience. And then Carissa here, Carissa Hampton is the Sustainable Households Manager with Urban Green Lab, another great partner of ours working in this sustainability space. And I'm going to turn it over to Carissa to talk through some housekeeping items related to our Zoom webinar today.
Yeah. So just a reminder to use the chat in the Q&A feature. We're only taking questions from the Q&A feature. So any questions that you have that come up, make sure you put that in the Q&A button at the bottom. And a great thing about the Q&A feature is that we can really wait or hold all those questions until the end when Kendra and Chris are finished speaking on these topics. And just to let you guys know that every episode is recorded and will be up on our YouTube afterwards. To get us started, we are going to put a question in the chat. So our question today is, what comes to mind when you hear the term climate resilience? I know for myself, that was kind of a confusing topic. I didn't really know what climate resilience meant prior to, these different topics. So what comes to mind when you hear the term climate resilience? So as we're kind of having some of those responses come in. So
no answer is an incorrect answer. There's nothing wrong here, but trying to just get our juices flowing before we hear from some people very deep in this topic.
Right.
Right. I see some great ones coming in. Something very tangible, like planting more trees.
Yeah. Bouncing back. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Absorbing climate shocks and building back better.
That's great. We'll keep those going in, keep those coming in.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it back over to Allie so we can introduce some of these sustainable happenings, our guests, and we can get going.
Right. Thank you so much, Carissa. We like to start off the episode with a few things that are happening around Nashville. They may not be directly related to the episode topic, but there's always something sustainable happening in our city, so we like to talk about it and promote it. First up here is a Southside cleanup held by Recycle Reinvest. That's going to be happening on Saturday, October 21st from 11 to 1 p.m. And you can sign up at their website, recyclereinvest.org. They hold these cleanups, I believe, the last Sunday of the month, but this month is going to be on the Saturday. So if you're interested in cleaning up, doing a litter cleanup effort, that is your information there. Moving right along, we have this very fun event, different kind of sustainability, Open Streets event in North Nashville being held by Walk Bike Nashville and the Nashville Department of Transportation and Multimodal infrastructure. This is a great event to open up a street in Nashville and really experience what it means to take back some of this public infrastructure and see, what it would be like to walk down Arthur Avenue in North Nashville without any cars on it for the day. Take your rollerblades, take your skateboard, walk around with your kids, whatever you'd like to. There will be booths. I believe Urban Green Lab will be there. I know Waste Services will have a recycling truck there, so you'll go check one of those out. So that's on Sunday, October 22nd. And then Tennessee Zero Waste Day. Some of you may be aware that Tennessee has its own specific Zero Waste Day in October. That's on October 27th. And the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation is leading some efforts to hold events in and around the Nashville area and across the state of Tennessee during this week of October 27th. There will be things like webinars. I believe one of the Nashville Public Library branches will be holding a take back event, some sort of repair event to help you repair common household items. So this will be a great opportunity to get your hands dirty in some zero waste things. They're posting some information about that here shortly, and you can find that on their website, Tennessee or tn.gov/environment. And one of the many things going on that week, and specifically on that day, October 27th, is a webinar that my team is hosting. It's the Myth Busting Zero Waste webinar. So we're taking a little spooky spin on it because it's about to be Halloween. We'll go through some common myths that we know we've heard being in the recycling and composting industry. Hopefully enable all of you to be better practitioners of these services. So it'll be fun. There will be some prizes, and we hope that you'll join us, and you can scan that QR code to register for that. And with all of that, now I'm going to turn it over to our guests, Kendra and Chris, and I'll have you both first start off by, of course, introducing yourselves, filling in anything that I didn't quite capture in just your headline, and then if you tell us what your sustainability journey has looked like and how you ended up working in the mayor's office in Nashville.
Thanks, Allie, and thanks so much for having us here today. We're really excited to be on Sustainable in the City. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kendra Abkowitz. I work out of the mayor's office on sustainability and resilience issues. So that basically means I get to work across our different departments that touch those topics. So anything ranging from open space, green space, to transportation, energy-related issues, waste-related issues, water-related issues, really runs the gamut, and then also with the external community. So it's a really broad broad responsibility, but also one that is incredibly gratifying. In terms of my sustainability journey, I think I was always raised with an appreciation for natural resources in the outdoors, but and recycling in our home and turning off the lights when we left a room. But I didn't really understand the concept of sustainability until I had the chance to intern at Vanderbilt University in their Sustainability and Environmental Management office. And so in that role, I was really exposed to all the different ways that sustainability touches daily activities and operations, and also sort of the blending of technological solutions with human behavior and policies and decision making. And so it was a great learning ground for me to, again, understand all the different types of stakeholders that can affect how we interact with our environment, but also all the different ways and perspectives that you can advocate for change and implement that change. And so that actually turned into a full-time job at Vanderbilt, and I spent 4 years there. And then the rest is history. Since then, my career has always been focused in the sustainability, environmental, or resilience-oriented space. I think now also being a parent has brought a new sense of urgency and responsibility in terms of thinking about future generations and the world that they're going to live in, whether or not it has access to natural resources, but also whether or not it's going to be livable, or whether those conditions are going to be so severe and uncomfortable that it's hard for them to live. And so that's a little bit about my sustainability journey and how it's brought me to the role I'm in today.
Thanks so much, Kendra. And Chris, how about you?
Well, I joined the mayor's office about a year ago in a 1-year executive fellowship for a national nonprofit called Fuse Corps. Fuse focuses on addressing racial inequality in the U.S. and driving systems change by bringing mid-career professionals in from the private sector, different sectors into the public sector, to bring fresh perspectives and address urgent issues. So for Nashville, that was looking at climate resilience and figuring out how we could help Nashville's different departments make thinking about climate resilience and adaptation part of their standard operating procedures. I came to this work via an interesting path, I guess. Most of my career has been focused on sustainable development overseas. I spent 10 years working in Liberia, West Africa. I did some work also in South America and in China before that. But most of that work focused on increasing energy access for people who might not live near urban grids and needed to look for alternative ways to meet their energy needs. So in particular, I focused in on building renewable systems, off-grid systems. Overseas, a lot of solar and some interesting biomass applications. But then towards the end, I was involved in some hydropower projects. And so after my 10 years overseas in Liberia, I decided it was time to come back to the US and try to focus in on climate challenges here, as well as social inequality challenges. Those were the two areas that I really wanted to come back and focus in on. So Fuse Corps represented a really amazing and innovative opportunity to do that. And being able to join the mayor's office in Nashville has really been an eye-opening experience. And given us a lot of opportunities to figure out how we can make the city's operations more resilient.
That's great. Thank you both so much. And I'll probably say it more than once while we go through some of these questions, but we're so very lucky to have you both working in Nashville on these issues. I know some folks in my in waste services have been a part of that conversation about improving metro operations related to climate resilience. So I've been peripherally aware of the work that y'all do, and it's you do such a great job. It's nice to get some context for how you came to this work. And we started off with a question, what do people think of when they think of climate resilience? And moving from that, I would love to have you both share some definitions for us, clarify some of these concepts that can feel a little complicated to people, and sometimes a little intense because we're talking about, extreme weather and sometimes some scary concepts. But so let's start off with climate mitigation. Can you both or either of you define that for us?
Sure, we've got a slide up here that gives some examples, but quickly first, just some definitions. Mitigation really focuses in on slowing down or eliminating the trends and practices that are warming the planet, which are largely burning fossil fuels. So mitigation looks at things like substituting in renewable energy, solar or wind, instead of grid-based power that comes from natural gas or coal, for example. In terms of vehicles, it's looking at electric vehicles instead of the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. So how do we get greenhouse gases out of the environment, or reduce the amount that we're putting into the environment on a daily basis? In terms of adaptation and resilience, it's focusing in on how we can recognize the fact that the climate has already changed. Warming is already occurring and will continue to occur. So how can we adapt our infrastructure and our systems in a way that better protects them and people from the impacts of climate change? So that's looking at things like raising roads out of the floodway, raising electrical systems out of lower elevations, basements or ground level that might be flooded. And then doing things like in inner cities where we have a lot of impervious services, putting in more parks, more green infrastructure, different strategies that can help to absorb floodwaters when we have high intensity rain events. So it's focusing in, adaptation is focusing in on modifying our built environment and our practices so that we're better able to cope with the changing climate. And finally, resilience is really, and a couple of people went into this on the chat earlier. I think we had a lot of very accurate responses, but how do we anticipate and prepare for climate change? Can we think about disruptions that might happen with losing power? So we have backup generators at our critical facilities, for example, or if we're able to build out distributed generation systems where we have our sources of power located near the use, then disruptions that might happen from big storms are minimized. So we've got some examples up here on the screen. We've got mitigation actions on the left here in the blue, and then adaptation or resilience actions in the darker blue on the right. I gave a couple of these examples already, but let's talk about transportation for a minute. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we could look at reducing single car trips and encouraging more use of public transportation on the mitigation side. Whereas on the resilience side, we want to focus in on populations that may not have access to vehicles and would be mobility constrained during an emergency event. So what do we need to think through in preparing those communities, preparing to evacuate those communities when a disaster does occur?
Thank you. This chart and these very clear examples hopefully help people understand how these concepts really play out in practice. And speaking of in practice, Nashville has a draft climate adaptation and resilience plan that's currently available for public comment. Can you walk us through the plan itself and how it will make Nashville in particular more resilient?
Sure, Allie. So we do have a plan that was released in late September. It's currently available for public comment until at least October 31st, but potentially longer. And it's a really, really robust document. And Chris took the lead in developing this. So major kudos to her for getting us to this point and working collaboratively with so many stakeholders to develop that work product. the plan is really, really robust. And so I'm going to touch on some high level components of it here, but recognize that there's a lot more detail in that plan. And we would certainly welcome this group and all attendees today to dig into that framework and get us your feedback. It generally follows content established for adaptation and resilience plans under the Global Covenant of Mayors Common Reporting Framework. And we'll talk a little bit more about Global Covenant of Mayors here in a moment. But specifically what our plan includes is a background on climate change and mitigation and adaptation work completed to date. So essentially, what's the journey that our city has taken to get us where we are? Then an overview of climate hazards for our city, how those hazards impact different populations in different ways, and how we use a systems perspective to assess risk to key functions of our city, and then an assessment of potential impacts and vulnerability outcomes across the city. And Chris will provide additional detail on each of these pieces of analysis here in a moment. Really importantly, it also includes an adaptation resilience roadmap, which essentially sets in motion numerous goals, strategies, actions, and key performance indicators, and then also outline some tools that the city should be using to further adaptation and resilience, and then also measure progress, right? So how are we making sure that we're actually delivering on activities that are outlined in this plan? And then also recognizing that we released this plan at the end of the Cooper administration, yet the bulk of the work following the public comment period is going to happen during the O'Connell administration. What are the key actions that the O'Connell administration needs to take to ensure continuity during that administration change and really leverage the momentum that's already been built? So again, a lot of detail. Really, when I think about it, the real meat of the plan is the implementation roadmap and the strategies contained within it. And so those are really the actions that'll make Nashville more resilient. Chris provided several examples in her response to the previous question about what adaptation work can specifically look like. But there are many, many more included in this roadmap. And so beyond those specific strategies, we found that there's so much appetite and momentum for adaptation and resilience work in our city. And so we hope that this plan really serves as a first step to amplify the issue so that we can compel adaptation and resilience actions across Metro, but also within the community. So again, really just a starting point for this work. And there is a lot of work to be done.
Thanks so much. That's a lot of really great context. And I heard you mention somewhere in there that piece of accountability. So making sure that we have steps that when these tools are used, when this roadmap is used, that we know that things are actually being implemented, right? We have, there's often that criticism sometimes. I think it's maybe friendly criticism, but that Nashville has so many plans, and it's always really important that we, as Metro government, are showing our residents that we really are following through when we make a plan. So I really like that you touched on that. And to take a step back in time a little bit, can you provide some context for why and you mentioned it was under the Mayor Cooper administration, why that administration took on the plan or the framework of making a climate adaptation and resilience plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Mayor Cooper signed on to something called the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, most recently in 2019. And so what that commitment required us to do is address climate change, both through mitigation, so reducing those emissions, as well as adaptation or preparing for a changing climate and climate changes that are already here. And so there are two different pathways as part of the Global Covenant of Mayors, again, to address those specific areas. And part of the commitment is developing plans to address both mitigation and adaptation, and then a commitment to implement them and regularly track progress. And so in 2021, Mayor Cooper formed a sustainability advisory committee that developed a really, really robust climate action plan. It includes nearly 300 emissions reducing actions across 6 topic areas. So many of you are probably familiar with that plan. There is some overlap with the concept of adaptation and the concept of resilience within that plan, but it was primarily mitigation focused. And so we had not spent as much time through that existing planning effort developing a climate adaptation and resilience plan. And so we recognize that, especially given the past year and a half that we've had, seeing extreme weather event after extreme weather event and seeing those impacts on our city, that climate change is here. And the time was now to really turn our focus to climate adaptation so that we can get some robust plans and processes in place that will protect our city and its residents. And so that's a little bit of how we got here. I'll also share that, you talked a little bit about planning fatigue, Allie, and planning fatigue is real. And so we took great care to, I think, inventory and take stock of existing planning efforts that overlap with concepts or are tangential to concepts that we're discussing in our plan. And so we really tried to recognize that and ensure alignment and leverage the existing work that's happened to help inform these plans. And then, as you noted, we are really focused on implementation, knowing that that is a priority and we are planned out.
It's always a balance, right? And making sure that we're presenting the thoughtful research and really just the thoughtfulness that goes into that comes into play when we make these plans, right? And it's just always a balance. We want to make sure that we're making responsible decisions. So we have these plans and develop these frameworks, and yeah, it's just a balancing act. And if you could kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on the planning framework, right? I know maybe as was peripherally aware to the planning of our zero waste master plan that guides more of my division's work. So for people who maybe haven't been on the inside of planning like that, what did it take to develop this plan? I'll just start calling it the plan since it's so long. But what were some of those processes? I think you mentioned that you worked with some metro departments. Can you share us a little bit about how that looked?
Yes, I can jump in here and we'll show some slides as well. This plan, or CARP as the acronym reads, it first existed as a chapter in the climate action plan that Kendra was talking about a minute ago. But we recognized that chapter needed to be expanded and made into a basic high-level vulnerability assessment. So looking at which parts of Nashville's ecosystem are most vulnerable to climate hazards and where we have the best opportunities to build in some adaptation strategies. So we brought together 12 key departments that are responsible for different aspects of the city's infrastructure and services. And we held 3 workshops over the summer, bringing everybody together. We had about 25 people in a room to make sure that we were really utilizing the knowledge and expertise of people with a wide range of subject matter expertise and experience areas. So what we did was the first step was to develop a system map. So we wanted to break down the microcosm of the city of Nashville and Davidson County into 5 basic pillars that describe the different aspects of life in Nashville. So once we were able to break that system map down, then we were able to think through more specifically where the changing climate impacts different aspects of life. So for community and culture, it was thinking about livelihoods, affordability, how people can make money and buy the things that they need, about health and well-being, and about access to goods and services. So where do people live and how far do they have to go to get the basic necessities of life, things like that. Natural environment looked at nature, basically. Infrastructure, we broke down into the various systems of our transportation, water, wastewater, energy, etc. And then we looked at the things that drive Nashville's economy and how those might be impacted by climate change. And then finally thinking through public safety. And public safety really falls under all of these categories, but we wanted to think specifically about vulnerabilities and keeping people safe and how that is affected by the changing climate. Importantly, equity was a consideration across all of these pillars and subcomponents because it's the people of Nashville that we really wanted to focus on with this plan. So we asked the questions of who does the changing climate hurt the most? How does it impact them the most, and why? So if we can go to the next slide. We used a methodology called an impact chain to help our workshop participants and ourselves think through these various steps. And what an impact chain approach does is it basically breaks risk down, simplifies risks, so you can think through why things do happen the way they do. So you start from the natural phenomenon, which is changing patterns of weather, increasing temperatures, more intense rain events. In this example that we're showing here, we're thinking about heat and the trend of the warming climate, which is both a stressor, a longer term stressor. So we're seeing more hot days on average during the year as we move into the future than we have in the past. And we're also seeing heat waves where we have multiple days in a row of high temperatures. So over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So moving from that climate hazard, which is a natural occurrence, what are the experienced impacts? How do we most immediately feel the heat? How does that change our daily lives? And one of the things that happens for a lot of us is we have to run our air conditioning more in the office, at home, in our cars. That's just an immediate impact that affects everyone somewhat equally, but one of the things that's really key to this approach is recognizing that the exposure that everyone in Nashville might feel when the temperature gets warmer is not the same thing as the risk that has for certain people. So when we think about the unhoused population that are living outdoors and don't have access to air conditioning, how is that population affected by greater heat as compared to people who comfortably live in the suburbs and have access to air conditioning, air-conditioned cars, et cetera? How does it impact households that may struggle to pay their electricity bills on a regular basis, and then the temperature gets warmer and energy bill prices go up because you're running your electricity more, you're running your air conditioners more, maybe they're struggling to keep up because it is so hot outside. So what are the cascading impacts on those households? What makes them more vulnerable than, say, you and me? And so when we start thinking through those vulnerability outcomes, how higher heat and more heat days might lead to financial insecurity for some households, then we have to ask the question of why is that? What are the contributing factors? What are the root causes that make those households more vulnerable at a baseline level than others? And then where should we focus to assist those households to better afford the electricity? Can we look at affordability plans? For utilities, there are different federal programs that help with electricity bills and affordability. Should we look at heat island effects and why certain parts of the city are hotter than others? What can we do to address those heat island effects? Last summer, Nashville was involved in a heat mapping campaign where citizen scientists went around the city. I'm sure I think you had a Sustainable in the City talk on that sometime back. But because of that heat mapping campaign, we realized that some parts of the city are up to 12 degrees hotter than others in the summer because there's just more impervious pavements, there's less trees, and there's less parks. So there's some really fairly simple, straightforward things we can do to address those impacts. We can plant more trees, we can develop pocket parks, we can look at cool roofs and green roofs and things like that, and really focus in on those parts of the city that are experiencing the heat islands, where people are suffering the most when we have high heat days. So working through this impact chain approach really helped us to focus in on the vulnerable populations and the things that we need to do to address inequities that already exist at the baseline level in Nashville, and that climate change is exacerbating. It's a pretty common saying, I think, that climate change is a threat multiplier. So where you have inequalities and you have vulnerable populations in a city already, the changing climate is really putting these populations on the front line because they are already less able to bounce back when life throws challenges our way.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you touched on all of that. It really is a kind of wicked problem. All of the climate impacts, like you said, it's a threat multiplier. And I'm glad you also touched on the way that this plan incorporates some of the work that's been done in Nashville around, the heat mapping campaign and all of these other things. It seems like this, the CARP, and thank you for using that acronym. That's much easier to use moving forward. But the CARP really encapsulates a lot of the work that has already been done in Nashville and builds on that in a really interesting way, with that additional framework of the resilience and the taking action to protect all Nashvillians, and the inclusivity that you mentioned of it really being all Nashvillians, including people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing poverty. Everyone who lives here deserves to be protected and be supported in this kind of framework. So thank you for all of that great information. And to circle back on the climate action plan, which is part of what this plan builds upon. You talked about how they relate to one another, but I'm wondering if you can touch more on how you see the climate action plan and the CARP moving together in the future, or being implemented side by side.
Yeah, that's a great question, Allie. So again, I see the climate action plan and the CARP as really critical pieces to taking action against climate change holistically as a city. So with that focus on mitigation and now bringing in an additional focus on adaptation and resilience, we're really, I think, holistically addressing the topic of climate change as a city. There are a handful of strategies that appear within both documents, meaning that they support both mitigation and adaptation. Two examples that I frequently reference are the concept of floodplain buyouts and depaving, right? These are things that can support both climate mitigation, but also adaptation. But I think we really see a lot of co-benefits coming out of both of these plans. So there might be adaptation resilience actions that end up having mitigation benefits and vice versa, right? So there might be actions that reduce greenhouse gases that also build resilience at the same time. And so there are a lot of synergies you see between these two documents. And really taken together, they paint a full picture of how Nashville is fighting climate change. And they do need to move forward concurrently, right? It's really important to recognize that climate change is here. We're feeling those impacts today, and we need to take action to essentially make sure our community is livable in an equitable way moving forward. But we also still need to focus on reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And so they really need to be pursued in tandem and in parallel. I think a couple of other things that I like to note when I talk about both of these plans together, they're really wonderful plans that sought to leverage expertise across metro departments, but also within the community. And so both had very robust engagement approaches that said, hey, Metro may not have all of the answers. How do our community partners, whether that be community-based organizations, the private sector, individual residents, how does everyone in Nashville have capacity to contribute to fighting climate change? And so both are also living documents that we anticipate are going to be implemented and updated over time. As with any strong plan, it serves as a framework, but it's not intended to be prescriptive by any means. And so we will really be focused on again implementing those in tandem, but recognizing those synergies when they might occur.
Thank you so much. And excuse me, I saw we had a question in the chat pop up asking about the CARP. I don't know if someone joined late, but just as a reminder, now we're using this acronym because the name is quite long, but we're talking about Nashville's Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan, or Climate Adaptation and Resilience Action Plan, I guess, to add the extra A back in there, which is the CARP for ease of saying it over and over again. And moving into from developing this plan, and I'm glad you touched on the community engagement piece as well, in addition to engaging metro departments. So it's very clear that y'all have done so much great work in developing the plan and laying out that framework. And then now we kind of move into implementation. And you mentioned that it's under the O'Connell administration. So moving from developing that plan, now moving into maybe an implementation phase following the public comment, are there any lower hanging fruit strategies that you see being implemented first and foremost for us?
Yes, I want to jump back to what Kendra was saying before, that we really tried to focus in on initiatives and programs that are already happening that we can build a climate resilience and adaptation lens into, so we don't have to, find some massive amounts of cash to start acting today. So I think we have a slide that shows our roadmap, which we can show here, and I'll talk through a couple of the lower hanging fruits. Really, those fall into the categories of here we go, community outreach and education, and training and readiness. Those are really the two areas that we want to focus on first, that don't require a huge amount of effort. Getting information out to people to think through what are the climate hazards that Metro is most likely to experience, that Metro is already experiencing, and what are some of the ways that households and businesses can start to prepare themselves to protect their assets, and to put plans in place so that people are ready for when those climate events do occur. So this roadmap breaks down the CARP into 4 primary goals. The first one is focusing in on Nashville's people. So it's focused on ensuring Nashville is equitable, safe, accessible, and affordable for all residents in the context of a changing climate. And this is really where most of the strategies occur under this goal. I have circled a couple in red here. That first one on the top left is conducting climate-specific outreach and capacity building. So there are a number of areas that we would like to focus in to get information out, whether that's through community centers or educational campaigns. Eventually, what we would like to do is help communities work through their own vulnerability assessment, similar to what we did for Metro, but for communities to think through where are our weakest links, where do we need to focus on building up protections and strategies. Maybe that's for communities that live in lower lying areas that are more prone to flooding, thinking through strategies that need to be put in place to protect critical infrastructure against flooding, and having some safer areas to plan to go to when floods do occur. So outreach and education is really a big focus of this first goal. Also, we're really focusing in on heat. Heat is one of those, it seems like an innocuous climate threat. People don't realize that heat kills more people in the US than any other climate hazard, more than tornadoes, more than hurricanes. It's kind of a silent killer, and it's also one of the things that is perhaps easier to address. So coming up with strategies to reduce the heat burden in Nashville, whether that's creating some cooling centers for the unhoused population, or doing things like I was saying before, building pocket parks and planting trees, putting in shade structures, having a series of water parks where kids can go cool off in the summer when they're out of school, things like that. So one of the things we would like to do in the near term is come up with a heat plan for the city, that identify some fairly easy to implement strategies to help keep people cool, particularly in the heat islands that we have throughout the city. And the other area here under the first goal is really identifying those safety issues, the areas that we need to protect people before events occur. So there's a lot of, we talked about plans and bridging the gap between having a plan and implementing the plan, but there is a need here to come up with some strategies and really focusing on where the biggest safety issues are, so that we can address them in the near term. In terms of infrastructure, the next step that we would like to see happen in the near term, after this CARP is publicly formally released, is to do a more in-depth vulnerability assessment, an audit of Metro's infrastructure and systems, identify where we are vulnerable and need to boost our practices. One of the areas that the city is currently working on is rolling out an optimized asset management program citywide. That's for all of the departments to better manage their equipment, their vehicles, their buildings, what have you, and think through how those assets need to be adapted for climate change. So that's something that's already starting to happen, and we're focusing on building a resilience lens into that asset management program that's being rolled out by Metro. And then finally, in terms of Metro's ability to implement this plan, we are working on developing a climate resiliency toolkit that's developing some tools and templates and processes that departments can use to ensure that they have the knowledge and the resources to implement the strategies in this plan. One of the things that we are working to develop is a training program specifically focused on climate hazards and preparation for climate events. So that's something that we're working with the Office of Emergency Management to develop over the next year. So this roadmap that we're looking at here, there's much more detail for each of these objective areas. And those are broken down into near, medium, and long-term planning horizons. So this is a 10-year plan, but I would say a good 2/3 of the objectives and strategies are really focused on the near term. And as Kendra said, this plan is really a starting point. The idea is for it to be reviewed and updated on an annual basis to see what we've done well, where we still have gaps, and we need to perhaps make adjustments as we move through implementation.
Thank you so much. And I love the sound of a toolkit. It's like empowering the people who are going to actually be carrying out these strategies and refining processes in Metro government. That's super important and very welcomed, being a Metro employee myself. And you mentioned, I didn't realize that heat is did you say it's the top killer across the board for climate threats? Yeah, that's very surprising to me. And yeah, the silent killer of it all, wow. Was there anything else surprising that either of you learned from this experience, whether it be impacts like that you didn't quite know were as bad as they are, or things about working across a bunch of Metro departments to make a plan?
I'll jump in kind of with my 2 cents. So I think something that was really refreshing and exciting to me was there's a lot of great adaptation and resilience work that Metro departments are already doing. So that could be programs or specific activities or maybe pilot projects that Metro departments and community partners are already hosting that are examples of adaptation and resilience. And so the good news is that means there's a lot of momentum that we can really leverage and examples that we can highlight as best practices. And then it becomes more of a how do we augment or expand programs like these rather than starting from scratch. And so I think that was really invigorating, again, to see that there's some great things that are already happening. We just need to figure out how to make more of that happen. I think we also learned, again, that there's a lot of motivation and interest in this topic. I sense that that's probably because we are starting to literally feel, we've talked a lot about heat, and I think the past 2 summers, we've had some pretty extreme heat experiences. We've had some high wind events that have happened with some pretty devastating impacts to certain areas of the community or the community as a whole. And so I think having those in our recent history and within our memory, I think are providing a great opportunity for us to take action now. And so that gives me great hope. It also presents challenges, though, in that, we are a city that's dealing with a variety of different growth-related issues. And so I think one of the challenges, but also opportunities for us, is how do we infuse the sustainability and resilience concept into a lot of different work that's ongoing right now. So there might be a variety of adaptation and resilience focused initiatives that arguably need to stand on their own as such, but there are also ways that we can systematically infuse that concept into other activities that are happening. And so I think that provides great opportunity, but there's always going to be a conversation about limited resources and where we're dedicating those. And so again, with every challenge, there's an opportunity, but those are some of the things that I see in our future as we transition more into the implementation side of things.
Thank you. Chris, what about you? Stepping into working in the mayor's office, anything surprising or interesting that you'd like to share from that experience through the fellowship?
Surprising, maybe not so much. I think the most valuable thing that came out of this process for me was just bringing people together, and as Kendra said, seeing how much passion and interest there is in this topic. We established a lot of momentum, I think, working together this summer. There were a lot of connections made and just partnerships formed that maybe weren't quite solidified before. And that the dedication that, not only these 25 people that came together over the summer, but many people throughout Metro have to addressing these urgent issues and keeping the people of Nashville safe. It's been really, really, really gratifying to see those partnerships formed. And I feel really hopeful that this plan being out there is going to be a very strong catalyst. And we're going to see a lot of really good, solid work happening in the near term as a result.
Great. Thanks so much. And we have a lot of great questions that I know I've been seeing in the chat and in the Q&A. Before we turn over to some audience questions, we've mentioned that this plan is available for public comment. Can you provide I guess we can go out and find the link to provide to the audience, but provide some context on how long that public comment period is open for, and what some of the short-term timeline looks like for people getting involved in your work.
Yeah, so we'll drop the link in the chat here in a moment. And Allie, if you can send that out to all attendees, that would be great as well. So we mentioned that it is available for review and feedback, and genuinely, as Chris noted before, we're really focusing on people in this plan. And so it's hugely important that we get feedback directly from the public on this plan, whether or not it aligns with experiences and dealing with climate, and whether or not we're prioritizing the right things. And so please send us your feedback. The feedback approach is just a simple web-based survey, but we're happy to take feedback in other forms if interested. We'll also be hosting 2 public info sessions essentially next week, and be on the lookout for information about those soon. We'll be putting those out via press release later this week. The comment period is currently scheduled to be open through at least the end of this month, but we might shift that out longer depending on level of interest and kind of volume of comments received up until October 31st. Beyond that immediate opportunity to engage, there's a whole host of things that individual residents or organizations can take to help really build momentum for this work. So some quick things you can do are building your awareness of resources that already exist. Metro's Office of Emergency Management has some great online resources focused on building preparedness for disasters, which is a huge part of recognizing that weather-related events are here, and there are steps you can do in advance to help your ability to cope with those. So check out the Office of Emergencies website, as well as ready.gov. So they also have resources for small businesses and a host of other great reading materials. I also think educating yourself on anticipated impacts associated with a changing climate is really important. And again, there's a wealth of content within the CARP that does this, but in the coming weeks, we'll be trying to develop some really condensed versions of that content that makes it much more readable for the public and really summarizes in a streamlined fashion, the high points that everyone needs to know. There's a whole host of opportunities as we transition from planning to implementation to contribute. So we really focused again on steps that Metro can take to adapt and build resilience, but we'll be broadening that effort in future phases so that it encompasses actions that communities and organizations can take. We talked a little bit today about the toolkit that we've developed in partnership with Metro departments. Some of those resources are going to be adapted or made available for the public and organizations. So those are things like hazard vulnerability self-assessments, different mapping tools, and a variety of other things. And so in the future, we'll be building out a full website that has this content on there. As part of the public feedback process as well, I think if you have specific ideas that you're interested in sharing with us about what that partnership can look like and how you'd like to get involved as a resident, please send that our way as well.
Thank you so much. And we'll include all of these resources in a follow-up email after the episode, as well as if you both are okay with it, your emails, so people can reach out to you with any additional questions after. But with that, I know we have a lot of interest from the audience. It's very exciting that a lot of people have questions for you both. So I'll turn it back over to Carissa to go through some of the audience questions. And just another reminder, I know Carissa's mentioned it in the chat, but I'll say it for the whole room, to please put your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. Carissa will be pulling them from Q&A, not from chat. We want to make sure that we can get to all of your questions. So please put them in there. And with that, Carissa.
Thank you, Allie. This has been so insightful. Yes, we have had several questions pop up. So I'll just go ahead and dive right in. We have quite a few people, concerned about our forests. And so a lot of people are asking, how do you think we might elevate the citizens and Metro's awareness of the need to conserve these forests from fragmentation and the loss of wildlife? I'll let you speak to that first a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I do think there is really great awareness of the benefits of natural resources, of forests, and all that come with that, and sort of the climate benefits that come with that within Metro. And there are a variety of different departments spending a lot of time strategizing around what Metro's role should be in that process of trying to preserve and make available those forests. So it is a priority that Metro is aware of. I think the how is where the bulk of the work is being done right now. So figuring out all the different levers that Metro might have that it could potentially pull to help connect some of the remaining forests, and which of those has has resources available with it that can actually effectuate that. And so again, there's a great amount of awareness about the concept of preserving these forests that surround the city, and we're really focused on how to do that. I do think there is great opportunity to educate the Nashville public on that. Part of that is, again, the basics of understanding, the benefits of trees and natural resources and preservation of those ecosystems and how they fit sort of into the larger health of a city. And so I think that's the real opportunity area to elevate that conversation and make sure that residents are really aware of that. The reason I bring that up is with any action that Metro or a local government takes, the public is going to view that and have an opinion as to whether or not that action was warranted or a good investment of resources. And so we're always very focused on how can we most effectively communicate the why behind our actions when we take those. And so I think in order for us to effectively communicate the why, that also takes some priming and some education with the community to ensure they understand why we're focusing resources where we are.
Awesome. Are there any, research or studies that are available to the public about how the impact of our city's growth, the city's growth, and how that's, how to work against that?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts come to mind when we think about our city's growth. I do not believe that Nashville is alone and that we are experiencing exponential growth. There are a variety of other cities that are either farther along sort of in this growth journey or have experienced similar impacts. That being said, I do think Nashville feels things uniquely, and our populations and community feels that uniquely as well. So I don't want to minimize the fact that what we are feeling is truly unique and presents challenges. And so I think there are lessons learned and best practices that we can pull from other cities as it specifically relates to this topic of adaptation. I think an area where we need to have a lot more conversation is the concept of, displacement. So what happens when we see significant growth occur and that pushes residents or neighborhoods out of spaces that they have called home for quite some time. I think I think our city is aware that that's happening, but we have not necessarily gone through the process of developing really thoughtful strategies for how we mitigate that. And so I look forward to having those conversations as a city as we continue through implementation of this work.
Gotcha. And you talked a little bit about the gentrification and, removal. Is there any, work around, some people are thinking about the elderly with no known neighbors. Are there any plans around checking in on them, the impacts of those really vulnerable populations?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of strategies that individual residents can take, and then a variety of different Metro programs that uniquely serve different populations that we might consider to be vulnerable. And so I do think there is a network of Metro organizations and nonprofits that regularly serve those populations. And then again, individual actions that we can take as residents during particular, weather events or climate events to make sure that those populations are being protected and taken care of. I think our roadmap also lays out a variety of kind of more strategic measures and programs that I think are worth considering to ensure that, again, we're keeping vulnerable populations out of harm's way where we know it's highly likely that a climate event is going to occur. And so I think the two sort of most geographically specific weather events or climate impacts where this type of strategy can be deployed are looking at flooding and, again, extreme heat scenarios. So how can we remove the risk altogether by potentially thinking of, movement of different facilities or populations, but also how do we mitigate those impacts where we know they're going to occur? So a combination of those two things.
Gotcha. So the next question we have, so given the September's worldwide, temperatures blowout, indicating a speed up of change or climate change, what is the timetable that is being used to ensure the availability of food, resources like water, sanitation, etc.?
So, one of the things that Chris and I realized as we pulled together this plan is, again, that it's really a starting point for the climate adaptation and resilience work for the city. What we also realized is that when we're looking across a variety of different infrastructure systems, but also specific populations, there's a need to go one layer deeper and establish specific thresholds for action. And I think that's where the concept of kind of a date certain or timetable for various scenario planning and justification for actions under a date certain would really come into play. Because I think the reality is we can plan across a community and kind of here highlight a number of areas where we need to focus more specifically, but that is going to be system specific or asset specific or infrastructure specific or event specific. And so I will be candid and say we have not gone to that level of detail in this report, but we have teed that up in our recommendations for future scopes of work to engage with consultants to kind of plan again around more specific scenarios. The climate projections that we did use in understanding our climate risks and hazards are those that were available, primarily from the Climate Explorer tool. And so again, those are taking a variety of different models from IPCC work and a variety of other research institutions. So it's an aggregation of the best available science. But as we all know, we're seeing, again, record-breaking and passing of thresholds on a daily basis. And so that's right for further and deeper research to make sure that we're planning more specifically and in some ways, very cautiously moving forward.
Gotcha. So all these, heating and cooling and water and sewage treatments, they're all using energy, generated outside of Nashville. Is Nashville focused on other means of power generation, or what can Nashville do to support and build broader energy resilience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we do have an interesting relationship here locally in that we are within the Tennessee Valley Authority service area, and Nashville Electric Service is our local power company. And their contract requires them to purchase all but 5% of their electricity needs from the Tennessee Valley Authority. Something that I'm really excited about is they are recently approved a power purchase agreement to purchase that just about that full 5% of their flexibility provision through a renewable power purchase agreement. And so that's one very clear and recent example about how the city is working collaboratively with NES to try to ensure that we're not only decarbonizing, but also building resilience. We also just wrapped up an assessment of the potential for installing solar and associated costs and benefits across Metro's building portfolio. So recognizing that Metro is a very large property owner across the city, wanting to understand, again, where it makes sense to install solar and where it doesn't. And so that's another a specific example of how we are taking steps to build resilience into Metro's operations. I think once we, work through some of those low-hanging fruit items and pilot projects, we're going to see increased interest in things like rooftop solar on a variety of different projects in the commercial space, but also the residential space. And so NES has indicated that, they're very interested in working with residents and businesses to make that a reality, and are looking at their rate structure to see again where they might be able to further incentivize that work in alignment with TVA's regulatory framework. We have also started conversations about microgrids in Nashville. And so I'm working closely with NES right now to identify some potential locations throughout the city where it might make sense to look at microgrids moving forward. And so again, this is an area where there's a lot of momentum, and I think we're having the right conversations and just need to make sure that we push them forward towards implementation.
Okay. So I guess this is more of an opinion question. How well do you feel like Nashville can move forward given the need for regulations, given our relationship with the state?
Mm-hmm.
And just, speak a little bit more about, I guess, once we start to implement this, climate resilience plan, I guess the monitoring and the evaluation of that, would that remain with the mayor's office, or do you feel like it would shift to other metro departments?
Yeah. So I'll take the second question first. Actually within the plan, we set out an approach for essentially next steps, implementation, and again, ensuring success of this work. What we have put forward is that obviously the mayor's office needs to be a critical supporter and involved in this work, and that ideally, they do have a staff person at a minimum, one focused on this work, but they're also deploying this work in partnership with metro departments through something that we call a climate working group. There's been a very similar group that has been meeting for 2 years now, called Metro Sustainability and Resilience Roundtable, that again has representatives from a variety of different metro departments who regularly get together and talk about what they're doing to build sustainability and resilience. And so this would actually be an augmentation of that group that would regularly get together and report out on progress in implementing strategies that are assigned within the roadmap. And so that's the structure we've set out. I think creating this plan, not knowing what future staffing for sustainability and resilience might look like, we tried to create space where the mayor's office can continue leading this work, but also where it would not die on the vine if the mayor's office did not want to continue leading this work. And so I think the good news is that the mayor's office will continue spearheading this work, but I can't underscore enough how involved and critical and essential it is to have metro departments on board with the concept to actually effectuate change and successfully implement. As far as it relates to, our relationship with the state, I think the real strategy that needs to be taken is, again, communicating the benefits of action, but also the consequences of inaction. And so I think there are some really compelling metrics that, that are available, talking about, for every dollar invested in climate resilience and adaptation measures, that's avoiding, multiple times that need for investment in recovery and recovery efforts moving forward. And so I think really elevating the conversation and coming at it with some critical economics is a huge part of ensuring that our partners at the state level are aware of what we're doing. I think there's also a lot of benefits in there being tons of federal dollars available right now for this work. And so being able to create those opportunities where we see Metro, the state, and the federal government partnering to do innovative work is something that again, I think the state is interested in when we approach them in the right way.
Thank you so much. It looks like it's 1:14, so I'm going to try to go ahead and ask one more question. Let's try to fit one more question in. Last winter, Nashville's residents, experienced that drastic cold snap. Is Nashville more prepared for extreme weather this winter, or long-term strategies in the works to guard against it in the future? Do we think that we're, ready now?
Yeah. Yes, the cold snap was I think a great wake-up call for many of us. Following the cold snap, multiple Metro departments had debriefing meetings and sort of postmortems with TVA and with NES. And so there are a variety of actions that TVA is taking to better harden their infrastructure and also insulate themselves from different from circumstances that happened in December, so that from a generation perspective, they're better suited to not fall into those circumstances in the future. NES likewise has been working with us very closely to take some steps to be proactive to prevent what we saw happen before. We talked about the 5% flexibility provision and moving forward with renewables and microgrids and a variety of different strategies there, but also more robust communication, I think, with Metro and individual residents about outages when they're occurring and when they're expected to be prepared. So a lot of exciting work happening on that front. It's not specifically related to the cold snap, but I also know that NES has been really looking at more strategic approaches to vegetation management. So a lot of outages in the wake of some of our high wind events have been caused by vegetation that has snapped power lines. And so that's not to say that we need to cut down trees. That's certainly not what we need to do. As we just talked about, trees are a great mitigating strategy as it relates to urban heat. But I think being more strategic in managing those systems is part of the answer. And so, again, a variety of different steps that Metro is taking, that NES is taking, and that TVA is taking to make sure that kind of an outage does not occur again. And many of those, again, have not only adaptation and resilience benefits, but also sustainability benefits when we're looking at low carbon resources.
Awesome. All right. So I think that for time's sake, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Definitely all those links and things that came up throughout the presentation will be in the follow-up email. Allie, do you want to close us out?
And just thank you again so much to Kendra and Chris from the mayor's office. We really appreciate your time and all the great work you do to keep Nashville sustainable, climate resilient, all the things that you do on top of all of that. And thank you all for coming and learning from these great experts. We'll be back with another episode of Sustainable in the City on November 8th. We'll be bringing on some people some youths from some Nashville youths who work on climate resilience as well. So it'll be a great additional perspective after this episode. So thank you all and have a good rest of your Wednesday. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.